Hello everyone. It's time for chapter 6 of um, Manga in Theory and Practice. Um, yeah, the audio is getting worse and worse every single video, I think. Though chapter 5 was pretty good audio wise. It doesn't really matter as long as, we get the story in. So let's just begin. Let me see where chapter 6 starts. Yeah. Chapter 6. What is a setting? What setting is to a manga? What is a setting? Settings, another of the four fundamentals of manga design, must also be approached with care. The manga's setting is the world that unfolds in your manga. It is where you want to place your characters. These worlds come in many forms: fantasy, science fiction, action, adventure, sports, school life, horror, and so on. But whether they are of the fantastical or of the everyday, worlds built within manga arc are different from our own, and readers want to immerse themselves within those worlds. Many aspiring mangaka tend to overlook this point, but the way a manga's setting is drawn directly connects to whether the readers will take to a manga. Very important. If a large number of readers want to engage with the world of manga, that manga is on its way to becoming a hit. If we say that the manga creator's foremost concern is that of creating characters, then readers are primarily motivated by desire to be immersed in that creator's worlds. Wishing to encounter certain characters and being interested in the story are secondary concerns. Readers want to be immersed. With this being the case, a manga's setting plays a vital role in attracting readers. The setting is an alternate reality, and such it must be grounded in realism. If you create a world haphazardly, the readers won't achieve immersion and will likely lose interest in reading your manga. Even in the world's If the world is fanciful, the setting must exist as a whole and structured entity within the mangaka's mind, and it must have an inner logic. Only then will readers become absorbed in the events that unfold within that world. People read manga because they want to experience unfamiliar worlds, sometimes one that can't exist in our reality, like a frozen world, to give an example. They want to follow the adventures and great drama within the imaginary world of a manga. Yukinobu Hoshino's science fiction manga are exemplars of grand fantastical worlds created with detail and realism. Even his spaceships are grounded in scientific theory and drawn with authenticity, as if they truly are floating through the weightlessness of outer space. If the ships had been simply drawn according to whim, they would have felt contrived, and the readers would not be able to become immersed in the manga's world. At the same time, readers are also interested in worlds that reflect their familiar daily lives. They enjoy the fiction similar to their own lives, but not the same, that only manga can provide. Representatives of this type of manga include Sazae-san and Kochikame. In Sazae-san, her family's home is established in detail, including the layout of the rooms and the locations of their possessions. In Kochikame, the area around the branch office is depicted in such meticulous detail that it creates the illusion that Ryo-san actually exists in there. Because of these worlds are portrayed so convincingly, readers desire to become immersed in them. Where Bao, the visitor, failed. One manga from my early career was called Bao, the Visitor. It was during the time I was working on that manga that I began to realize that the importance of setting. For example, an evil organization serves as the antagonist, and I came to understand that I couldn't go anywhere with the story without first knowing how they acquired their funding and the kind of locations of facilities they controlled. But I also have bitter memory from my creation of Bao's setting. The protagonist, Bao, is a boy who can turn into a monster, and the manga opens with a scene that takes place on a research train where Bao is being experimented upon. The train runs along the Sanryu coast, and in real life that railroad hasn't been converted to electricity and still runs on diesel rail cars. I visited the area and I knew that it was a diesel line, but for the purpose of the story, I wanted Bao to be electrified by high voltage power lines. So I added in overhead power lines and drew the scene with Bao running atop of the train. After the story was published, readers wrote in to notify me that route ran diesel trains, not electric. Even worse, I drew it with a double track, when in reality it is a single track railway. I had drawn two mistakes at the same time. The readers who noticed this were likely never be able to re-enter Bao's world. I had committed the grave failure of losing readers. What I ought to have done was not to force a diesel railway into an electric one, but rather use a different railway, or devise some other way of electrifying my character. I learned my lesson and took it to heart. Anytime I create a setting without putting in proper effort, my readers will catch on. Only a master can rely on mood. On the subject of failures, I had an abandoned project about a year before my professional debut. I had titled it Sunarashi Sandstorm. It's a lost work, never published, and with the original art now gone. But I recall the story was about a boy going to save his sister from a strange sandstorm in the desert. That manga failed because the storm as antagonist lacked punch. No matter how unusual the phenomenon may be, sandstorm just doesn't have enough going on to fill the role of the antagonist. So he made like a sandstorm as his antagonist. Interesting. This resulted in a manga with more mood than a story, and in the end, I couldn't make it fit the battle manga structure. Sandstorm failed because I focused too heavily on mood, but had I been better artist at the time, my work might have found acceptance. I think that's the defining characteristic of mood-based manga. If you're not an incredibly skilled artist of the level of Akira Toriyama or Katsuhiro Otomo, the manga won't come together. Some shoujo manga aimed at a teenage girl audience like Wana no Kuni Hoshi, the star of Cottonland, are able to create a wonderful atmosphere, but those manga can only succeed when at least some major element of the work is far beyond that of their peers, like the creators being exceptionally emotionally perceptive or the setting being just right. In other words, a focus on mood comes with a great risk of failure unless the mangaka is extremely gifted in some way, whether that is drawing ability or world building or something else. Only a handful of masters can succeed while pursuing mood above all else. Furthermore, because shoujo manga aim for that softer kind of mood, they might be able to get away with art that isn't quite so meticulously drawn. Readers of shonen manga, on the other hand, demand more detailed art, which makes the hurdle for successful mood-based manga that much higher. Be thorough about your research. let's return to the topic of how to create a setting. When you're creating a fictional world, to put it in the terms of Star Wars, you need to know what's going inside the Death Star. In other words, in order to convey a setting, every image, down to an unassuming landscape, requires a research into every detail. Sometimes your answers will come from the needs of your manga. Let's say you've decided to draw a train. You shouldn't just draw a train. There must be a reason you're drawing one in that picture. What kind of train does it need to be to fit that reason? Getting the time period right is a major point. If your manga is taking place in 2001, you need to know what kinds of cars were on the road before you draw them. If you draw a current model car in a manga that takes place in 2001, readers will notice straight away and think, this is a sham, and will lose immersion in your setting. Some details might never come as a factor. You may or may not need to draw a contemporary cell phone, for instance, but broader topics like what was trendy, what songs were topping the charts, or other such facts all form a level of basic knowledge you need to acquire. Say you're drawing a hospital in your manga, knowing what else is in the building behind the waiting and examination rooms will lead you to create an authentic setting. You may be thinking that's a lot of unnecessary effort, but the more thorough your research is, the firmer the setting and the stronger your confidence will be. In order to draw it right, you mustn't slacken in your research. How to create a setting. Now let's move on to create your setting. I'm going to list some basic examples as they come to mind of where you should focus your attention and what areas need consideration and research to flesh out your setting. When drawing an organization, who's at the top of the organization and what is that person like? What are the goals of the organization? What is its source of funds/income? What kinds of special privileges, permissions, permits does the organization hold? How it was formed and who was the founder? Roughly how many members are in the ranks? What kind of internal rules are in place? Do they have some kind of distribution network? How are responsibilities divided? Are the divisions groups, departments? Do they have ties to the underworld? Do they engage in foul play? And so on. When drawing is a historical time period, what is the society like? Who is the ruler? What is the religion? Fashion, architecture, interior design, food, currency, geographical features, current affairs, and so on. When drawing geography, topography, guidebooks, how are the places located in relation to each other? North, east, south, and west. What kind of roads are there? What kind of railroads? How far away is the nearest airport? What are the local industries? Is there a seaport? What kind of hotels and restaurants are there? Other local information you'd look up before vacationing, and so on. When drawing sports, rules, history, uniforms for players and references, how many players and references and referees are there? Is someone paying everyone's salaries? And so on. When drawing a sushi chef, how does the chef go about sourcing fish in the morning? Prep work and cleaning. It's it's very realistic because as a note I'm making, very realistic because in restaurants you are supposed to every single morning I think you get fresh food. That's how you run about your business and stuff. Make it realistic. If anyone worked in the food industry, they know what I'm talking about. How does the chef handle cleaning up after closing time? Hand motions and amount of force used when forming the sushi. Preventative measure against food poisoning. Seasonal topics, and so on. When drawing a love story, what is the romantic interest's job? How much does he or she make? What does he or she wear? How does he or she behave, including etiquette? What are potential locations for dates? And so on. When drawing science fiction, what is the infrastructure like? Who is the head of the state? What is the fashion like? What types of flora exist? Do the animals have sexes? How are they born? How do the robots move? What are they made out of, including qualities of the material? And so on. Some things can't be researched online. As you can see, countless considerations go into creating a setting. You may be able to get much of what you need by researching online, but sometimes you just have to go to do the research in person. Because of the time and effort involved, going in person is far more difficult than referring to research material as a draw. But when you go to a location in person, you will find a real understanding of what you need in your drawings, and you might find the inspiration for new ideas. Quite often, you will also find that a location is different in person than you had imagined it would be. Two areas might seem close to each other, but when you walk the distance, it is much farther in reality. A building that seemed enormous in a photograph may actually be underwhelming, or a location that seemed extravagant might surprise you with its tawdriness. Therefore, if you want to draw things right, I recommend experiencing them for yourself as much as possible. After I started making Jojo, I got into the habit of visiting the places I was drawing whenever I could. Even for the third arc, Stardust Crusaders, I went to every location along the story's route, excluding the most dangerous areas, up to and including Egypt. I visited Egypt 3 times in total, though as I don't handle non-Japanese foods very well, I brought with me instant ramen and bottled drinks. When I went out to do shopping, I'd run into vendors who tried to charge me prices inflated by a factor of 10 or even 20 without batting an eye. Even though I was already aware of that practice, I was able to learn so much more by experiencing it myself. I set the climax of Jojo's 5th arc, Vento Aureo, in Rome and performed extensive research in order to faithfully portray the city. Before going there in person, I studied how the city was built in depth, and geography, history, what kind of buildings were there, what the infrastructure was like, and more. I read travel guides and searched for pictures and committed as much of them as I could to memory. Then, when I had exhausted my research, I traveled to find the things that weren't in the research. The things I wouldn't know I needed until I found them. As a result, the Rome I drew captured real sides of the city, from the buildings to the traffic signals and signs, and the side streets and more. If you were to go to Rome and trace the path taken by the hero, Giorno, his allies and the villain Diavolo from the Colosseum to the Tiber, Tiber? Tiber? I don't know. I think you would find that I accurately captured the real distance. The map in a guidebook can help you gauge the distance, but looking at the map will always leave something unsaid that will pique your curiosity. those answers will only be found in person. Most people assume you can now find anything you need to know on the internet, but many details will escape your awareness. For instance, the markings of the police cars, the shapes of mailboxes, the uniforms worn by the mail carriers, what the toilets are like, and so on, unless you go observe the location with your own eyes. The sense of distance, Japan versus the American Midwest. Jojo's 7-story arc, Steel Ball Run, involves a race across America. But I knew that undertaking that journey by myself in one single trip would have been impossible. Instead, I split up the research in 3 sections, from the West Coast to the deserts, from the Great Plains to the Mississippi River and Chicago River, and to the finish line in New York. Each region possesses its own culture and is home to different types of people. Without going there for yourself, it's impossible to comprehend the feeling of scale in the Midwestern United States, where the scenery stretches on forever and unchanging. The feeling of distance there is nothing like in Japan. Say, for example, an enemy is approaching from afar, at such a distance that escape would be trivial in Japan. In the Midwest, the open landscape remains identical from one hour to the next, and I was struck by the real sense that I could never make an escape from such an adversary. There was simply nowhere to hide. I was able to put that experience to good use when it came time to draw the manga. Travel there is mostly done by car. When you drive across those vast plains, the scenery is mostly devoid of any ups and downs, and is dotted only by the occasional town with nothing to claim but chain stores. Seemingly little to provide amusement aside from watching movies, and you hardly ever see anyone else about. Rather than inspire thoughts of enjoying nature, it felt empty and lifeless and made me wonder if there was any fun living there at all. A kind of atmosphere hung over these places that felt rich for suspense. By connecting these real experiences to your settings, you can add real depth to your manga. There is one problem that only comes up if a mangaka's career is going well, and that is that keeping up a serialized manga requires great amount of time and stamina. Missing a deadline will begin to exact a mental and physical toll. And once you finish your assignment and it comes time to face the next week's planning meeting, you will be already exhausted in mind and body. Under those conditions, continuing to make good manga is not possible. If you can't find time to do this kind of research, or even to watch movies or read books or other activities to help find ideas, you'll wither as a mangaka. This is a basic concept as it gets. Is as basic a concept as it gets. But it must be said, nothing is more important than meeting your deadlines and establishing a pace and rhythm to your work. Don't draw everything you research. No matter how much research you do and how much you experience yourself, you're never going to draw all of it, and you mustn't let the establishment of your setting become the focus of your manga. What the readers want to see are your characters' actions and their fates, and you have to remain on guard against spending excessive time on setting the stage. The worst is when a manga goes on and on about the setting and at the very beginning. This would be a manga about a sushi chef starting out with the sushi chef wakes up early. He goes to the fish market at such and such hour. When he first arrives at the fish market, this is what he does, and so on. When you spend too long establishing the setting, the reader will become impatient and think, just start the story already. For another example, if you spend too much time showing everything your characters wear, as opposed to having those characters do things the reader will similarly respond. Enough with the clothes. The setting should be incorporated in your character actions and dialogue. If you integrate the setting with the obstacles your protagonist faces, that setting will come across to the readers. You can also use something that seems wrong and out of place, like putting a plant from Northern America in a desert, as important foreshadowing. If you can draw the setting with relevance and cohesion to the story, you can fully communicate the setting to the reader without having to devote needless exposition to it. Because manga has the capacity to express multiple concepts at the same time, the setting can be combined with other elements of the story. Although being successful at it, it requires intent and technique. When you read other manga, you should also study what you're reading. Be on the lookout for how the mangaka incorporates setting. With practice, you'll begin to get a sense for it. After the setting is complete, the setting becomes a world in which the readers want to become immersed. But it is also a world in which the creator wants to become immersed. When manga primarily focuses on its setting, I believe that is because the creator deeply wants to be immersed in that world. But the problem faced by setting-focused manga is that once that setting is fully fleshed out, the creator's desires are satisfied. If the goal is to create complete depiction of the world, and the depiction becomes completed, the creator will need a new goal to top the previous work. But the more magnificent the completed setting, the harder it is to land upon a setting that can surpass or even match it. Akira's setting was so masterfully created that I still don't think it has been bested to this day. Undertaking that challenge is of course an option available to you, but any creator of a setting-focused manga should only go down that road if they are prepared for the difficulty ahead. If you want to further develop an already completed setting, using new characters may help you succeed. Like how the prequel Star Wars trilogy found a new protagonist in Anakin Skywalker, who would become Darth Vader. Oh my god, spoilers! Characters are always capable of inner growth. They keep on growing and never reach a completed state. As I previously wrote in a chapter on the 4 major fundamentals of manga structure, the royal road of creating manga requires intimately connecting all 4 fundamentals and not just setting alone. Well, that is it for chapter 6, guys. We only read this in 30 minutes, so I think I will keep reading chapter 7 because we still have time here. So let's get to it, okay? There was no pictures in this, so I don't need to give you any material to look at. We can just, start on chapter 7. All elements connect to the theme. The theme connects the 4 major fundamentals. In the chapter on the 4 major fundamentals of manga structure, I propose that each element influences the others. And it's the theme that unifies and connects the character setting and story. This isn't limited to manga, but applies to movies, novels, and television shows alike. Any superior work is backed by a strong theme. The theme is not something expressed directly, but is something akin to one who rules from the shadows. To understand the connection between setting and theme, you need to look no further than the movie Frozen. Some say that Frozen was such a blockbuster hit because the heroine was a strong modern character, but I think the biggest factor was its white, cold world locked away in snow and ice. The theme of the protagonist's loneliness could only have been expressed in the frozen setting, and contrasting the warmth of the sister's love with the frigid cold provokes a strong emotional response. If that same story were set in a desert or a science fiction setting, the movie would have communicated something completely different. To use an example from manga, I think that the theme of Mushishi is its depiction of the ethereal spiritual mood that dwells in nature. Shigeru Mizuki, Gegege no Kitaro, would likely draw the backgrounds as far as more lifelike, while Kazuo Umezu, Cat-Eyed Boy, would draw the character in greater detail. But I suspect that Mushishi's creator understands that in the context of mood-centric theme, there is no need to draw everything in detail. I'd even say that the less detailed drawings reinforce and help express the mood. Don't let your themes become muddled. Themes, in another sense, are how the creator views the world and what he or she considers ideal ways to live. The author's goal is to embed them in the root of the work and to endeavor to keep them firmly in place. For example, Kojikame's consistent theme is the depiction of everyday commotions created by childish policemen. The mangaka never attempts to send Ryo-san out on an adventure away from his post in Kameari just because adventure manga were popular at the time. At most, Ryo-san goes on a vacation every now and then, but even then the stories deal with the day-to-day. The greatness of Kojikame is that its theme has remained consistent throughout the decades. Let's say you create a soccer manga, and what you truly want to depict are the friendships shared by the young players, but your manga doesn't find the popularity you had hoped. Your editor comes to you and says, what is popular right now are manga with detailed depictions of complex soccer strategies, and you need to make your manga more about that. If you let your theme of friendship become muddled, your manga will fail. If that happens, you might lose confidence in your manga and never be able to put it right again. If you're ever in that situation, you need to think long and hard about what you want to draw. In this example, whether you want to draw a manga about friendship or about the strategy of soccer, and keep that theme firm in your heart. Whether or not you can succeed at that depends on how strongly you believe in your theme. This might be a difficult task for those who are still lacking in life experiences. When a theme becomes muddled, it's a sign that the mangaka's own approach to life is unsteady. Until that is made firm, the mangaka is unable to hold to a persistent theme. If in the end the theme just isn't working out, scattershot attempts at making changes won't help. All you can do is start from the beginning. Shore up your theme, seek new new avenues of development, and find your way through your situation. Themes reveal the creator's philosophy. Because ways of thinking change over time, it follows that some themes will reflect the thoughts of that time. Furthermore, themes exist in countless varieties, each depending on what the author wants to create. Even when the overall goal is the same, each creator has a distinct point of view, which will result in the theme taking different forms. If a mangaka wants to portray police corruption, that might take a direct form, or it might focus on the friendships that develop within the corrupt organization while depicting its ugliness and folly, or it might follow any other possible directions. For example, take a mangaka who wants to draw erotic work. What actually is erotic will depend upon the mangaka. type of figure, type of face, behavior, gazes, purity or carnality, full of life, full figured, skinny, radiant skin, and so on. As you can see, the erotic contains many facets. Those definitions become directly connected to the art. That is how the mangaka will draw women. This includes the thickness of the line work, but it goes further than that. Drawings aren't only composed of the lines, but they also reflect the artist's subconscious thoughts. To give a few examples, Kojima's brush-like lines, Hisashi Eguchi's modest subjects, George Akiyama's use of calligraphy pens to vary line thickness when drawing skin. A paean to humanity theme as a product of chance. Jojo's theme is a paean to humanity, in other words, in affirmation of that mankind is wonderful. When the characters in Jojo are faced with adversity, they find a solution and forge a path onward by their own abilities and never by some convenient coincidence. No god intervenes to save them, and no magic words suddenly fall from the sky into their hands. To be honest, this idea of a paean to humanity was not a product of deep consideration or of wrestling over what I wanted to draw. It was a phrase I came up with lightly. I was told to write something for the inside flap of the first graphic novel, and I just happened to get the idea to write about the magnificence of mankind. At the time, I didn't mean much more by it than to say, I'm going to write a mecha manga where people fight using machines. But as I've continued to write about that theme over the years, I've come to see it as a subject of great depth. In hindsight, I can see what led me to that theme. When Jojo was just starting to be serialized, my grandfather passed away, and it made me think about how people die, but that some part of us is left behind to be passed on to the following generation. East of Eden, a work I deeply admired, also dealt with the theme of connection across generations. And at the time, everyone was talking about Roots, the American drama series. On the surface, the series appeared to be slavery and racial discrimination, but as I watched it, I thought it was a hard story about a family. When I started Jojo, I wanted to write about a battle between good and evil, but these influences led me to make my series about passing the torch. If I had never come up with the paean to humanity as the theme, Jojo would have never turned into something different. I might even have found myself unable to find ideas to get my characters out of the dangers in which I put them, thereby bringing my series to nearly an end. To an early end. Sorry. The mistake of choosing a theme based on what will sell. I've already touched upon this, but it bears repeating without exception. A theme should reflect the creator's life. When deciding upon a theme, the one thing you absolutely must not do is choose one that does not interest you simply because it matches what's selling. Let's say you take a popular theme for your own work. When the trend passes, you'll be left with a theme that doesn't interest you. And as you begin to question why you're writing about it at all, your manga will hit a wall. The most important questions for a mangaka are, what do I want to draw? And why do I want to draw it? A brilliant person would read this book and use my advice to custom tailor manga so that every element is optimized for popularity and appeal. And that mangaka might possibly come up with a calculated hit. But that will only work for a short time, maybe 3 years at best. From what I've seen and heard, that's about how long it takes before an intellectual fatigue sets in. Then when manga's creation becomes rote, the reader will notice. If a mangaka draws out of a desire to have a hit and the manga successfully finds a large audience, the creator's ambitions will be fulfilled, the passion to create will wane, and the manga will arrive at a dead end. The mangaka will begin searching for a new path and be beset with doubt. If you view creating manga as a temporary business endeavor, that result might be good enough for you. But if you want to pursue the royal road to being a mangaka, then I urge you to avoid that way of thinking. If you find a theme that interests you and connects with you on a personal or emotional level, even if you think that theme may be too dark to sell, you should resolve to create your manga around that theme. Your manga's success will not depend upon a seemingly sellable theme. Whatever your theme is, if it feels right to you and you layer upon it characters and a story that move you, it will undoubtedly be an interesting work and one that readers will welcome. I wish for anyone who wants to become a mangaka to believe that which they feel is right and to follow manga's royal road with determination. Implementation example 1. The process of making manga. How to find ideas and create panel layouts. So we're getting a little bit into the technical. Let's just conclude with this part. So this will be, I think, the last stuff that I'm reading you guys. Oh, we have visuals as well, and I think it's pretty long. So let's see. How to find ideas and create panel layouts. Where ideas are found. Now, I'd like to build upon my previous explanations by outlining in specifics the process for creating a manga. Each mangaka has their own process, but mine goes like this. Idea note cards. 2. Sketchbook for my meeting with my editor. 2. Script. 2. Panel layout. 2. Pages. Interesting. Very interesting. So he first sketches some stuff in his sketchbook that he presents to his editor, then makes a script, like probably a written script with the, as he said in chapter 3, characters. He writes about the characters, then he makes a panel layout, which means kind of like storyboards, a panel layout, just heavily focused on paneling and stuff like that, which is pretty interesting. And then pages. Every manga starts with an idea. That being the case, I'd like to start this section by discussing where ideas are found. In this too, each creator has their own method, but the one universal is that ideas come from a place deeply connected to the creator's life experiences and way of thinking. I believe that ideas should come from something closely connected to the artist's life, whether that can be a personal interest, trouble and romance, a desire to travel to some foreign country, nearby events, or anything else. When I first started submitting manga in high school, the world was still vast, with many places unknown to me. I admired stories set in mysterious locations around the world, whether true as in the adventurer Naomi Uemura's traveler's writings, or imagined as in Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. And that desire to create stories in similar settings. Musically, I'm also drawn to progressive rock and jazz fusion. which combines influences from various cultures around the world. And that has also likely been an influence in the kinds of stories I write for Jojo. I've always been intrigued by the idea of supernatural powers, and I've often speculated about how, if they were real, one would go about scientifically proving them. I think that's what led me to come up with JoJo's Hammond and Stans. Take interest in other viewpoints. I keep the practice of always writing down the things around me that pique my interest. But I don't write them down then and there. Waiting sometimes means that I forget the thing that interested me, but that doesn't bother me. Anything that I would forget after a short span of time must not have been that interesting. If something is worth remembering, I'm confident I will remember it after a time. The notes I keep broadly fall into three categories. Things I like. For example, if I see a movie that has scene I particularly like, I'll make a note of it after. But I don't just write that I liked the scene. I analyze it for the parts that I liked and why I had a positive reaction. Opinions on the contrary to my own, events that gave me doubts, people I don't understand. These encounters can be a rich source of ideas, so when you run into them, you mustn't let the opportunity escape. Rather than shut out options and occurrences that run counter to your own understanding, try to be more analytical about them. Why does this person think that way? Why is this happening? When I heard this, what did I think about it? By asking these kind of questions, you can learn about perspective other than your own. If a subject or situation doesn't interest you or doesn't match your tastes, but you can come to understand why other people like it, you can expand your world and discover new sources of ideas. Events that provoke emotional reactions, frightening, humorous, traumatic. By considering the reasons why an event made me feel scared or made me laugh, the experience can lead to new ideas. Ideas are limitless. I'm sometimes asked, do you ever run out of ideas? But I don't believe that ideas ever run out. I think a creator's curiosity can run out, and then the ideas stop coming. Because good ideas come from one's life and experiences. Losing interest in the world means losing the ability to come up with ideas. If you're always able to maintain interest in something and you can keep your antennae poised to pick up on and react with openness to the occurrences around you, you won't run out of ideas. The key word there, and what I hope you'll make efforts towards, is openness. You mustn't restrict your attentions to only the things that interest you. That sort of conceit must be avoided. If I ever find myself struggling with finding new ideas for a story, that will be the day I quit being a mangaka. I count myself fortunate that my idea notes continue to flow and that I can continue being a mangaka. I used to be concerned that I would run out of energy and that I would probably retire once I hit 50, but as long as I can remain curious and interested, I'll keep on drawing a little while longer. That's absolutely beautiful. Like, I just cannot stop myself because I think this part, he's literally talking like he's the main character of his life, which is so fucking cool because he's so passionate about it. It doesn't obviously he had probably a very rough time drawing manga, and like he felt struggly. Obviously it's like just very rough. But can you guys, so let me read it again for you. If I ever find myself struggling with finding new ideas for a story, that will be the day I quit being a mangaka. I lose interest in life. It's over for me. His life is being a mangaka. I count myself fortunate that my idea notes continue to flow and that I can continue being a mangaka. I used to be concerned that I would run out of energy and that I would probably retire once I hit 50, but as long as I can remain curious and interested, I'll keep on drawing a little while longer. It's so well said. It's so well said, actually. Okay, let me just move on. Meetings with your editors. When the time comes to begin drawing a manga, I go through my idea notes, select the ones I think I can use, and bring them to my editor. When I have these meetings, I bring along a sketchbook to take notes. As an example, I'm including notes for my first meeting for Jojo. This way you can get an idea of what I write down. The basic idea behind Jojo's opening chapter is that a young man with amnesia reclaims his identity. The page I'm including are the notes for what I wanted to include in the chapter. The basic flow of the story is as follows. Jojo rushes in, shouting, "Stay away from Yasuo." Jojo shoves Yash. Oh my god, I'm having a hard time, sorry. Jojo shoves Yasuo out of the way. Jojo goes to hit Josuke with a rock. Josuke subconsciously activates his stand. Beneath those notes, I wrote ideas for Josuke's soap bubble stand. In the upper right, where I wrote screw bolt, were ideas for Joshu's stand, although it doesn't appear at this time in the story. The part at the bottom where I wrote Yasuho comments are notes on the chapter, how the chapter will conclude. I bring these notes with me to the meeting, and as I talk to my editor, I revise and add to them. Additions come through our exchange of ideas, and if something seems weak, I'll rework the idea, which may result in needing to perform additional research. The results of the meeting determine whether or not I'm able to immediately proceed to the next step of my process. And if I can't find suitable ideas during the meeting, our discussion will eventually reach a standstill, and I won't be able to move on to the next step. Write a script, envision the dialogue and panel layout. As for what the next step is, that will depend on the mangaka. Once I get through the meeting with my editor and receive my go-ahead, I write a script. For my scripts, I write 1 page's worth of dialogue per sheet of composition paper. See page 183. The total available drawing area for each manga is fixed and of limited space. Each page is 270 millimeter tall by 180 millimeter wide. Multiply by that, by the number of pages to be published. Everything you want to draw has to fit within that space, and when I write my script, I plan out and allocate my use of that space. Jojo is a serialized manga published by a monthly magazine called Ultra Jump. Each chapter is allotted 45 pages, which I typically consider in groups of 4 to 5 pages. I divide the story into these smaller sections based on the amount of story beats and the flow of the plot, giving the most important sections to the most page space. Through experience, I've gained the understanding of generally how much story will fill 45 pages. But as I write the script, I'm constantly adjusting the balance of various sections by asking myself, what do I want to draw? What do I want to convey to the readers? Along with other considerations. For example, I want to build this part up and hold back here and move the most impactful scene to the very end. This step of the process is when I decide where to place the emphasis, and as I do so, I form a fairly complete picture in my head of which images I want to put in each panel. In this example, the most important story beat is Josuke awakening, and I built the scene up to that point. Divide the panels with a rhythm. There aren't any particularly hard and fast rules when it comes to dividing panels, and simply by reading many manga, you pick up some effective techniques. Rather than read explanations of the subject, it's more important that you put in the time of studying manga and practicing how to divide panels for yourself. I believe that the better results come from not overthinking it. The most fundamental point, and perhaps the only point, is to communicate with emotional honesty through your manga. Manga is read with a certain rhythm. Go to the left, to the left, to the left, then when you reach the edge of the page, go down. Once more, go to the left, to the left, to the left, then when you reach the end, turn to the next page. The important point is to build an ebb and a flow, basically by deciding which panels to make larger or smaller. In prose, the writer uses personal judgment to place paragraph breaks to create a structure and provide for ease of reading. I would say the same is true for manga. Just as the panels in a single page have a rhythm, so do the panels across the manga as a whole. If you look at the panel structure of sports manga, you'll find out that the chapters with competitions will be constructed in a way that builds towards the team's victory. Another thing to keep in mind is that if the same panel structure is used across many pages in a row, the readers will grow bored. Just like a movie, a manga needs variation. If you use the pattern of close-up, long shot, start the next sequence with a long shot instead. Sometimes mangaka will consciously change their panel style between different series or stories to create a different mood. Throwing a few curveballs into the design, like using diagonal divisions or setting panel in a large white space, can prevent readers from becoming bored. I sometimes use round panels, particularly when a character's back is turned to the viewpoint, which can leave the character's emotions unclear. When I want the reader to clearly understand the character's emotional state, I insert a close-up of the character's face in a particular panel. Japanese manga's unique qualities are found in the rough layouts. After the script, I draw the rough panel layouts. The rough layouts or storyboards are something I do by feel and explain the process in words would be exceedingly difficult. Countless approaches exist to drawing rough layouts, and I can't say if any particular ones are good or not. Some mangaka are able to just wing it and draw the whole thing off the cuff from start to finish, while others may fill up 10 pages, then find themselves unsure how to fill the rest of the pages, and ultimately decide on stretching out an action scene at the rest of the way. When I hear vastly different examples like that, it seems like the rough layouts truly are different for every mangaka. That said, I've heard from some aspiring mangaka who feel they can't draw rough layouts at all. To help those people, I'd like to use an example from the first chapter of Jojo. In this scene, in which I cover in 2 pages, Joshua roughly shoves Yasuho aside, and then Josuke sees this and becomes angry. It's in the rough layouts where I believe the decisive difference between Japanese manga and Western comics can be found. In Western comic boards, panels are laid out with the most importance placed on the good drawing composition, and the sketches focus on the characters' actions. Japanese mangaka, on the other hand, place emphasis on characters' internal thoughts and emotional reactions. This focus on the internal is what sets Japanese mangaka apart. If a Western artist were to draw these storyboards, I think it might turn out like the example on the right. I feel that this layout conveys the same story to the reader. Joshu roughly shoves Yasuho aside. Yasuho is knocked to the ground. Yosuke sees what happened. Yosuke is angered. From the standpoint of the story, I see no problem there. But what I most wanted to convey to the reader in this scene is the mysterious boy Josuke's awakening. He wakes up in order to protect the kind woman, Yasuho, who had been caring for him when he mistakenly believes she is in physical danger. Wanting to show Josuke's affection for Yasuho, I allotted these scenes 2 pages rather than one. Doing so enabled me to finish the main characters in great detail, and by including more of Joshu in the scene, I aim to establish a contrast between the two sparring men. The viewpoint doesn't move. Once I showed the rough layouts to my editor and I received the go-ahead, I finally move on to the drawing the final pages. Sometimes I'll make a minor adjustment to improve the pacing, the flow, or other such considerations, but the panel layout and overall drawing placement remain mostly identical to the storyboards. What I mainly focus on in this step are the compositions in the scenes in the first chapter of Jojo where Joshu shows Yasuho. I framed the viewpoint facing Joshu and Yasuho, with Josuke only seen from behind, and the viewpoint remains that way through the scene. If I were to go into this detail, there would be no end to the explanation, but suffice to say that my approach is similar to that of film. I think of the viewpoint view as being a motion picture camera and largely remains in one place. The characters themselves can move, but if the camera is constantly moving here from the left, then from there from the right, the shifting perspective will confuse readers. In the worst case, the readers will even get multiple characters confused with each other. When the scene changes, the viewpoint can change as well, but within the panel layouts of an individual scene, I take more cinematic approach. Though other mangaka may handle it differently. Very interesting that he explains that, and I suggest everyone else opens his manga to the page where he's describing this, because it's really hard to understand without having that example in front of you, I would say. I don't have the example in front of me. I have his layout sketches. Forget what you draw. Once the final art is finished, after sketching, penciling, inking, and, if applicable, coloring, I deliver the pages to my editor. Because I value the feeling of a live performance, I don't correct minor errors. That moment I deliver the manuscripts, I feel a sense of achievement, but I always maintain the stance that I must forget what I've drawn. I don't revisit and dwell upon the past, even when I think to myself, I really made something great this time. I make myself forget that feeling. I believe that if I let myself feel that I've created a masterpiece, I'll stop getting ideas to create anything else. For that same reason, whenever others compliment me, I never take it to heart. Only children grow through praise. It's the mistakes and failure that provide me hints from where I need to go next, and that allowed me to keep drawing. Oh, cool. So the next is implementation example 2, but I think we're gonna stop here because we already have an hour. So we're gonna read implementation example 2, how to create a one-shot. Cool. So that's interesting as well. But yeah, thanks for listening to this. It's gonna be chapter 7 and 8 and a little bit extra. So yeah, let's stop here. Hope everyone has had a good listening. I'm sorry for the mistakes that I made, or if I was like a little bit off with my reading. I hope you could understand, and I hope you could follow this. And I will see you when we finish the book, because we're not far off. So good job. Have a good day or night. Bye bye.